Hollywood's golden age gave us stars who dazzled with charm, beauty, and unforgettable performances. But behind the red carpets and studio gloss, not every icon was as sharp as they seemed. While audiences saw glamour and talent, those behind the scenes often witnessed odd decisions, missed chances, and careers built more on timing than intelligence. In this countdown, we're pulling back the curtain on 25 legends who, for all their fame, may not have been the brightest minds in showbiz. Some embraced the clueless act, others stumbled through bad choices, and a few simply lucked into stardom. You might be surprised by who made the list, and why. These stories show that in old Hollywood, success didn't always come from brilliance. Sometimes it just took the right face, the right moment, and a little studio magic. George Raft, career self-destruct button. He had the swagger, the look, and real street credibility. Everything a 1930s gangster star needed. But when it came to making smart career choices, George Raft often shot himself in the foot. Time and again, he passed on roles that would become classics. He turned down the Maltese Falcon because the character didn't seem tough enough. That mistake handed the role to Humphrey Bogart and launched a legend. Raft also said no to Casablanca and Double Indemnity, uncomfortable with playing morally complex characters. His reasoning baffled studio executives. Internal memos described him as uncooperative and alarmingly short-sighted. Even worse, Raft's real-life ties to underworld figures like Bugsy Siegel made studios nervous. Combined with his gambling habits and resistance to guidance, his Hollywood goodwill quickly faded. While his contemporaries soared, Raft slid into supporting roles and forgotten films. Critics later said he didn't just miss out on history, he actively dodged it. His name, once box office gold, became a cautionary footnote in Hollywood's playbook. In the end, his biggest on-screen mistake might have been made off-screen, saying no too often and to all the wrong things. Jayne Mansfield, genius trapped in glitter. She lit up every room she entered with a smile that screamed confidence and curves that rivaled Monroe. But beneath the blonde bombshell act was one of the most fascinating contradictions in Hollywood history. Jayne Mansfield wasn't just a pretty face. She reportedly had an IQ of 163, spoke 5 languages fluently, and played classical violin. Yet, despite her intelligence, she leaned hard into the dumb blonde stereotype, building her brand on outrageous publicity stunts, tabloid headlines, and exaggerated on-screen personas. In films like The Girl Can't Help It and Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, critics often dismissed her performances as cartoonish, never realizing how calculated her approach truly was. While she had the brains to chart a long-term career, her choices often sabotaged that potential. She once rejected a Broadway revival because it didn't come with TV exposure. Instead, she starred in low-budget European films with thin plots, all while trying to keep her name in the spotlight through shocking antics and photo ops. Her personal life was just as chaotic. She endured a highly publicized divorce from bodybuilder Mickey Hargitay and surrounded herself with fringe figures who fueled her image but offered little support. Despite moments of brilliance, Mansfield's career began to fade under the weight of the very persona she created. Tragically, her legacy became a cautionary tale. Audiences remembered the act, not the intellect behind it. For someone so smart, Jayne Mansfield proved how easy it is to get trapped by the glitter when chasing Hollywood gold. Johnny Weissmuller, Tarzan lost in the real world. Swinging through the jungle with ease, he became the definitive Tarzan for generations. But when the camera stopped rolling, reality wasn't nearly as graceful. Johnny Weissmuller was an Olympic hero before he ever stepped onto a Hollywood set, earning 5 gold medals in swimming. His athleticism and striking looks made him a natural fit for the vine-swinging wild man. But over time, people began to wonder if the actor was truly playing a character, or just being himself. Industry insiders reported that Weissmuller had trouble reading scripts, often forgetting his lines and defaulting to grunts when he got lost mid-scene. Studios adjusted by removing dialogue and adding more action. Directors like W.S. Van Dyke would reportedly rewrite scenes on the spot to avoid confusion. Behind the scenes, colleagues joked that Johnny was better with a rope than with a script. He played the part so convincingly, it became difficult to separate man from myth. Off-screen, things didn't improve. Despite years of fame and a solid income, Weissmuller made questionable financial choices. He invested in failed hotels, gimmicky businesses, and even tried to launch a chain of Tarzan-themed restaurants, all of which collapsed. His personal life was just as impulsive. He married 5 times and was known to make bold romantic decisions without much thought. In later years, living in a Las Vegas hotel, Weissmuller was reportedly seen wandering the halls in his robe, introducing himself as Tarzan. What began as a legendary role turned into a lasting identity, one he couldn't quite escape. For all his fame and physical gifts, real-world navigation proved to be his greatest challenge. Wallace Beer, brute force over brains. His gruff voice and lumbering presence made him a box office favorite during the 1930s, and audiences adored his tough but lovable screen persona. But behind the camera, Wallace Beer wasn't exactly winning awards for charm or intellect. Insiders knew him as difficult, short-tempered, and resistant to anything resembling nuance. Directors often had to rewrite scripts to eliminate complex dialogue or emotional range. According to MGM production notes, he would memorize lines phonetically without grasping their meaning, resulting in flat performances that required careful editing to salvage. His on-set behavior added to the frustration. Co-stars frequently complained about his lack of professionalism. Joan Crawford, who worked with him on Grand Hotel, reportedly described him as cruel and arrogant. Child actor Jackie Cooper recalled Beer resorting to pinching him off camera to provoke tears during emotional scenes, a tactic that raised eyebrows even at the time. Off-screen, Beer's decisions were just as baffling. He once invested heavily in an ostrich farm, convinced it would be the next big thing. He also backed novelty companies with no clear business plans and often dismissed political discussions by saying, "I ain't got time for that kind of thinking." His financial and personal choices painted a picture of someone uninterested in anything beyond immediate rewards. Despite winning an Oscar for The Champ, few colleagues remembered Beer fondly. His success was more about presence than performance, more luck than learning. And when the spotlight faded, there wasn't much left behind, except stories of a man who muscled his way through Hollywood with little interest in the bigger picture. Esther Williams, mermaid without a map. She made synchronized swimming glamorous, turning underwater ballet into a box office sensation. But when it came to long-term planning and career evolution, Esther Williams often found herself treading water. As MGM's aquatic darling in the 1940s and 1950s, she became a household name. Films like Bathing Beauty and $1 Million Mermaid showcased elaborate pool sequences that made her stand out in a crowded industry. But behind the scenes, studio execs whispered that Williams relied more on athleticism and choreography than on acting skill or business sense. As one producer put it, "She swam beautifully, just don't give her too many lines." Her early fame didn't translate into sustainable momentum. When musicals fell out of style, Williams struggled to adapt. She passed on major roles that required dramatic depth, fearing they would stray too far from her aquatic brand. Offers for television work, which helped other stars transition, were routinely declined or ignored. Even her business ventures were hit or miss. While she eventually lent her name to a line of swimwear, early missteps included poorly timed endorsements and failed branding deals. Those close to her claimed she often ignored sound advice, choosing to trust gut feelings over expert counsel. Despite her glowing image on screen, Williams' behind-the-scenes decisions revealed a lack of direction. She had talent, charisma, and one of the most unique gimmicks in Hollywood, but no clear plan for what came after the water dried up. Her story is a classic case of a star built for one era who couldn't find her way into the next. Buster Crabbe, action hero, one note. He was the face of adventure for a generation, leaping from planet to planet as Flash Gordon and battling evil as Buck Rogers. But for all his fame in space operas and Western serials, Buster Crabbe never quite made the leap into serious Hollywood acting. A decorated Olympic swimmer turned screen hero, Crabbe had the physique and presence that studios loved. But behind the scenes, directors noted that he rarely read full scripts, relying instead on quick summaries or scene-by-scene instructions. He often resisted taking on dramatic roles, believing audiences only wanted to see him in action-packed physical performances. This narrow focus worked for a while, especially in the serial-heavy 1930s and 1940s, but as Hollywood evolved and storytelling grew more nuanced, Crabbe didn't evolve with it. Opportunities to diversify were dismissed, and producers began to see him as a one-note performer who couldn't break out of the action mold. Off-screen, his business sense was just as limited. Hoping to capitalize on his swimming fame, Crabbe launched a chain of backyard swimming pool dealerships. But poor planning, uneven management, and overexpansion caused the venture to collapse. Friends and colleagues described him as charming but overconfident, rarely accepting help or feedback. By the 1960s, Crabbe was largely forgotten by Hollywood, making sporadic appearances and nostalgic cameos. Despite his early success and iconic roles, he remains a symbol of how sticking to a single formula, no matter how popular, can eventually leave a once bright star adrift in the past. Ed Wood, ambition without ability. Few filmmakers have become as infamous as Ed Wood, whose unshakable confidence somehow existed in perfect harmony with a staggering lack of technical skill. To his dying day, he believed he was a misunderstood visionary, the kind of director who would one day be hailed as a genius ahead of his time. The problem? He didn't understand the basics. Wood lacked a working knowledge of camera lenses, lighting, sound design, or even storytelling structure. His most notorious film, Plan 9 from Outer Space, featured cardboard tombstones, mismatched footage, and dialogue that bordered on incoherent. Scenes often lacked continuity, and yet Wood defended his work as pure cinema. Behind the camera, he ignored professionals who tried to offer help. Cinematographers recalled him refusing to reshoot badly lit scenes, saying, "It's good enough." Actors who questioned his direction were told to trust the big picture, even though no one, including Wood, seemed to know what that was. He surrounded himself with loyal but untrained friends, mistaking devotion for talent. Wood's belief in himself never wavered, even as studios stopped returning his calls. He once claimed his films would be studied in schools, insisting that critics simply didn't understand his artistry. Meanwhile, he financed projects with borrowed money, filmed in one-take rushes, and used first drafts as final scripts. His work has since found cult fame, celebrated for being so bad it's oddly enjoyable. But Ed Wood's story remains one of Hollywood's strangest paradoxes. A man with endless drive but no compass, chasing greatness while ignoring the map entirely. Milton Burl, Mr. Television, Mr. Stuck. He was once the king of the small screen, a pioneer who practically invented TV comedy for American audiences. But as the medium evolved, Milton Burl seemed frozen in time, trapped by his own early success and unwilling to adapt. Known as Mr. Television, Burley ruled the airwaves in the late 1940s and early 1950s. His show, Texaco Star Theater, was a national sensation, but his material often leaned heavily on outdated vaudeville routines and recycled one-liners. As newer comedians emerged with fresh topical styles, Burley stubbornly stuck to slapstick gags and punchlines that hadn't changed since the 1930s. Writers who worked with him noted that he resisted new formats, rejected political or social commentary, and insisted on being the center of attention, even in sketches where it didn't make sense. When ratings started to dip, Burley blamed the audience instead of rethinking his approach. Offstage, his choices showed similar short-sightedness. He invested in several comedy clubs and venues across the country, but rarely visited or managed them. One club manager claimed Burley hadn't stepped foot inside for over a year before it shuttered. Most of his side ventures failed due to neglect, mismanagement, or lack of follow-through. Despite occasional comeback attempts, Burley never truly reinvented himself. His legacy became one of missed evolution, a trailblazer who refused to leave the trail. He opened the door for TV comedians, but then forgot to walk through it again when the landscape changed. Rod Steiger, method to madness. He was one of Hollywood's most intense performers, an Oscar winner who brought raw emotion to every role. But Rod Steiger's obsession with method acting often turned brilliance into chaos, and many believed his need for authenticity held him back more than it helped. Steiger made his mark with unforgettable performances in films like On the Waterfront and In the Heat of the Night. His commitment to preparation was legendary. He'd spend weeks crafting backstories, accents, and emotional triggers for even minor characters. But his process often slowed down productions, annoyed co-stars, and left directors scrambling to keep schedules intact. He once delayed a shoot for days because he claimed his character wasn't emotionally ready. In another instance, he demanded rewrites mid-filming to align better with what he believed his character would say. While this dedication occasionally resulted in electric performances, it just as often caused tension and cost overruns. More damaging were the roles he turned down. Steiger rejected both The Godfather and Patton, citing creative differences. These weren't minor slips. They were career-defining opportunities that went to actors who would go on to cement their legacies. Steiger, by contrast, drifted into lesser-known films, never fully capitalizing on his earlier acclaim. Peers respected his talent, but found his approach exhausting. Some said he mistook emotional volatility for depth, pushing scenes to extremes that didn't always serve the story. In trying to live every role to its fullest, Rod Steiger sometimes lost sight of the bigger picture and the opportunities that came with it. Earl Hollowman, safe, predictable, forgotten. He had the voice, the charm, and even a Golden Globe to his name. But Earl Hollowman never quite stepped outside the comfort zone he built for himself. While his resume looked impressive on the surface, it masked a pattern of safe choices that left him trailing behind his peers. Rising to fame in the 1950s, Hollowman worked steadily in both film and television, appearing in titles like The Rainmaker and Forbidden Planet. But despite working with major names, he often played supporting roles with little variation. When asked to attempt dialects or more emotionally layered characters, Hollowman reportedly declined, saying he didn't want to stretch too far. Producers admired his reliability, but also knew he wouldn't take risks. Scripts that challenged conventions or demanded vulnerability were passed on. As a result, casting directors began to overlook him for bolder projects, labeling him as a dependable but uninspired choice. Off-camera, he maintained a similarly cautious approach. He avoided major media attention, rarely gave interviews, and chose not to pursue opportunities that could have elevated his profile. Even after winning a Golden Globe for The Rainmaker, he didn't use the momentum to shift into leading roles or challenge typecasting. In an industry that rewards reinvention and boldness, Hollowman's steady but stagnant path made him quietly fade into the background. While others took risks and stumbled into greatness, he stayed in place, respected, but largely forgotten by the time the spotlight moved on. Guy Madison, a face without fire. He had the kind of all-American looks that casting directors loved: square jaw, piercing eyes, and a camera-ready smile. But Guy Madison's career proved that good looks alone aren't enough to keep the spotlight shining. Discovered while serving in the Navy, Madison became an overnight sensation without formal training or stage experience. His breakout role Until the End of Time launched a promising trajectory, but the momentum faded almost as quickly. Directors soon realized he struggled with emotional depth, often needing extensive coaching for even simple scenes. On set, Madison required line-by-line guidance and was hesitant to take on roles that demanded any kind of transformation. He avoided dialects, resisted playing morally ambiguous characters, and often defaulted to a stoic, flat delivery that limited his range. His performances were visually appealing, but lacked the spark that draws audiences into a character's inner life. Behind the scenes, his judgment didn't fare much better. Madison invested in several ventures, including a chain of gyms and a real estate firm, but lacked the business acumen to make them work. Associates said he was easily swayed by bad advice and rarely followed through on long-term plans. By the 1960s, Madison's fame had cooled considerably, and he found himself working in lower-budget European films, far from the Hollywood spotlight that once crowned him a rising star. In the end, his career is a cautionary tale about surface success without the depth to sustain it, a handsome frame with no lasting fire behind the eyes. Jean Arthur, brilliant but barely functioning. She had one of the most distinctive voices of the 1930s and 1940s, breathy, charming, and instantly recognizable. Critics praised her comic timing and emotional subtlety, and she lit up classics like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and The More the Merrier. But Jean Arthur's talent was often overshadowed by a deep discomfort with the very spotlight she commanded. Despite her screen success, Arthur was plagued by chronic anxiety and an aversion to fame. She avoided public events, rarely gave interviews, and often refused press engagements altogether. This wasn't aloofness, it was genuine fear. Studio handlers were frequently frustrated by her unwillingness to play the Hollywood game, and producers had to carefully manage her mental state just to keep productions on schedule. Her career could have soared even higher, but Arthur declined many high-profile roles, including It's a Wonderful Life. Directors said she second-guessed herself constantly and struggled to connect with co-stars off-camera, sometimes retreating entirely between takes. Her self-doubt made her difficult to cast, despite her obvious on-screen appeal. She eventually walked away from the industry without a clear plan, choosing a quiet life of teaching over enduring the pressures of celebrity. While her acting was often brilliant, her inability to cope with the demands of Hollywood left her legacy less defined than it could have been. In the end, Jean Arthur represents a rare case in Golden Age Hollywood. Someone with extraordinary talent but too much vulnerability to thrive in an unforgiving system. Her performances remain timeless, but so does the sense of what might have been. Tony Curtis, charm over substance. He was magnetic, stylish, and undeniably photogenic, the kind of actor who turned heads even before delivering a single line. Tony Curtis became a major box office draw in the 1950s, but beneath the surface charm was an actor who often prioritized fame over craft. Curtis knew how to captivate a crowd. Films like Some Like It Hot and The Defiant Ones showcased moments of brilliance, but those roles were exceptions rather than the rule. Much of his career was filled with lightweight comedies and glossy dramas where he could rely on charm instead of depth. Industry insiders frequently observed that he had little interest in challenging roles, preferring scripts that maintained his heartthrob image. In interviews, he was candid, sometimes too candid, about his motivations. He once remarked that he'd taken certain roles just for the paycheck or exposure, regardless of artistic merit. That lack of long-term strategy caused him to miss out on more substantial projects that could have redefined his legacy. Behind the scenes, Curtis was equally restless. He jumped between projects, made impulsive financial decisions, and struggled with consistency. His production company fizzled after a few underwhelming efforts, and his attempts to reinvent himself as a serious dramatic actor often came too late. While his name still carries star power, Curtis's career is a case study in how a focus on immediate stardom can limit lasting impact. He had the talent, but rarely chose to dig deeper, a decision that left many wondering what more he could have achieved if he'd truly committed to his craft. Peter Lorre, trapped in shadows. He had one of the most recognizable faces and voices in classic cinema, eerie, expressive, and unforgettable. Peter Lorre made his mark in roles that were strange, sinister, or tragic. But behind that haunting screen presence was an actor whose deep insecurities quietly limited what could have been a far more expansive career. Lorre first rose to fame in M, where his portrayal of a disturbed criminal drew global acclaim. Hollywood quickly typecast him in similar roles: the outsider, the villain, the mysterious foreigner. And while Lorre excelled in these parts, he also came to resent them. He yearned for variety, but often rejected opportunities to break his own mold, afraid of how audiences or critics might react. Friends noted that Lorre constantly undervalued his worth. He undercharged for his performances, accepted supporting roles when leads were possible, and hesitated to negotiate for stronger billing or creative input. Some of his decisions weren't just humble, they were self-defeating. He also struggled with off-camera demons. Rather than seek help or professional guidance, Lorre often retreated into himself, letting frustration and self-doubt shape his choices. He turned down several image-redefining roles that might have allowed him to evolve, choosing instead the familiar, even when it no longer served him. Despite his brilliance, Peter Lorre remained in the shadows, both figuratively and literally. His legacy endures in unforgettable performances, but his career also stands as a reminder of how fear can hold back even the most gifted from stepping into the full light of their potential. Frank Fay, brilliant on stage, toxic off. He was once one of the most celebrated stage performers in America, a vaudeville icon whose timing, wit, and presence earned him standing ovations. But Frank Fay's remarkable talent was constantly undermined by his own volatile behavior an inability to adapt to a changing world. Audiences adored him on stage. Fay could command a theater with just a glance or pause, and many credited him with pioneering the modern stand-up comedy style. Yet behind the scenes, colleagues dreaded working with him. His arrogance was legendary, and his temper alienated nearly everyone he encountered. Even producers who admired his ability admitted he was impossible to manage. His personal views also made him a lightning rod for criticism, and his reputation deteriorated as quickly as his popularity. In an era when collaboration was key to surviving in Hollywood, Fay made enemies at every turn: writers, directors, co-stars, even studio heads. Instead of adjusting, he doubled down on his combative approach, often blaming others for his stalled projects and career downturns. His marriage to actress Barbara Stanwyck ended in bitter separation, with many insiders citing Fay's controlling behavior as a major reason for the split. Though he occasionally found work in film and radio, the offers dwindled as word of his offstage toxicity spread. Fay's story is a textbook example of squandered talent. He helped shape the foundation of modern comedy, but left behind a legacy of burned bridges and missed opportunities. By the end of his career, even former admirers referred to him as the most detestable man in showbiz. Kim Novak, cold genius or passive player. She was luminous on screen, elegant, mysterious, and unforgettable. Kim Novak became a defining face of 1950s Hollywood, particularly after her haunting role in Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. But behind the iconic image was a performer often labeled as distant and disconnected, someone who never fully stepped into the control she quietly craved. Novak was never formally trained, and her rise was fueled in large part by Columbia Pictures' desire to craft a rival to Marilyn Monroe. Her natural beauty made headlines, but her subdued acting style drew mixed reviews. Some praised her cool detachment, while others called her emotionally flat. Critics and colleagues couldn't decide whether her performances were understated genius or just a lack of commitment. Behind the scenes, Novak fought for creative input, rejecting roles she found demeaning and pushing back against being molded into a pinup. But her efforts were inconsistent. She declined to work with vocal coaches or expand her skill set, and turned down films that might have challenged her range. While peers like Bette Davis and Katharine Hepburn reinvented themselves across decades, Novak didn't evolve much beyond her original image. Her refusal to engage with Hollywood's publicity machine also hurt her long-term appeal. She avoided interviews, rarely clarified misperceptions, and retreated from the spotlight just when she could have pivoted her career. In time, she became more of a symbol than an active participant, remembered more for how she looked than how she performed. Novak's legacy remains divisive, a star who commanded attention, yet never fully shaped the narrative around her. Was it quiet brilliance, or just passivity in the face of opportunity? Luc Costello, comedy's calculated clown. He was half of one of the most iconic comedy duos in film history, a whirlwind of slapstick chaos and rapid-fire banter. But Luc Costello, while brilliant on stage, occasionally blurred the lines between his scripted buffoonery and real-life judgment, leading many to question how grounded he truly was outside the spotlight. As part of Abbott and Costello, he brought laughs to millions with routines like "Who's on First?" and became a household name. But while Bud Abbott played the straight man, it was Costello's manic energy that stole the show. Yet off-camera, he could be volatile, overly sensitive, and easily rattled when things didn't go his way. Though he was a sharp businessman in some respects, keeping tight control over his image and brand, Costello sometimes made decisions that left his team scratching their heads. He reportedly rejected better scripts in favor of safer gags and resisted evolving his comedic style when audience tastes changed. Co-workers noted that he occasionally forgot lines or confused punchlines, relying on others to steer him back on track mid-performance. Some insiders believed that Costello, in embracing the clown persona so completely, lost sight of how to separate the act from reality. He demanded creative control, but didn't always recognize when his instincts weren't working. His later career was marked by declining box office numbers and strained professional relationships. Even with Abbott, in the end, Luc Costello's legacy remains rich with laughter, but it's also a lesson in how even a calculated act can lead to missteps when performance blurs into personality. Zasu Pitts, nervous energy, strong portfolio. She was Hollywood's go-to for nervous, fluttery women, all hand-wringing gestures and anxious glances. But Zasu Pitts, often dismissed as a one-note comic relief, had a more complex story behind the jittery persona she so frequently played. Pitts began her career in silent dramas, even starring in The Harrowing Greed by Erich von Stroheim. But when talkies arrived, her distinct voice and comedic timing shifted her image completely. She became typecast in roles that leaned heavily into the ditzy, overwhelmed woman, often stealing scenes but rarely being taken seriously by critics or studios. Off-camera, she was far more strategic than many realized. Pitts quietly invested in real estate and maintained a strong financial footing throughout her career. While others burned through salaries or fell into scandal, she managed her money and reputation with surprising savvy. Still, despite this behind-the-scenes intelligence, she rarely fought to expand her acting range or challenge public perception. Insiders suggested that Pitts sometimes leaned into her on-screen persona, even in real life, using it to avoid tough conversations or career shifts. When offered more diverse roles, she often declined, saying she didn't want to confuse audiences. In the end, Zasu Pitts built a long and financially stable career. But at the cost of being forever boxed in. Her nervous energy may have been a comedic asset, but it also became a professional cage she never fully escaped. Joe E. Brown, mouth first, planning second. With a grin wider than most could believe and a voice made for punchlines, Joey Brown became one of the most recognizable comic actors of the 1930s. Audiences loved his elastic face and athletic gags, and studios banked on his consistent charm. But behind the scenes, Brown's decision-making didn't always match his comedic brilliance. He came from a background in circus and vaudeville, and brought physicality to film in a way few others could. His timing was impeccable, and roles in films like Elmer, The Great, and Alibi Ike made him a box office star. Yet while his instinct for comedy was sharp, his instincts for career longevity were far less reliable. Brown famously tracked laughs like a scientist, timing audience reactions and studying punchline structures. But his commitment to being the funny man sometimes blinded him to broader opportunities. He avoided dramatic roles, turned down screenplays that required emotional nuance, and boxed himself into a comedic mold that eventually felt dated. Outside the studio, his choices raised eyebrows. Brown invested in side projects that didn't align with his brand and turned down work that might have pushed him in fresh directions. While others transitioned into television or reinvented themselves for new audiences, he largely stuck to what had worked before, even when it stopped working. He remained a beloved figure, but one whose later career never matched the innovation of his early years. Joey Brown's story is proof that even a genius with a stopwatch can mistime his own next act. Marie Wilson, smart dumb blonde. She built an entire career out of playing the dizzy, clueless blonde, wide-eyed, innocent, and often hilariously unaware. Marie Wilson became a fan favorite in My Friend Irma and brought that same character to radio, television, and film. But what began as a smart branding move eventually locked her into a persona that audiences wouldn't let go. Wilson was far from the airhead she portrayed. Those close to her described her as witty, articulate, and more business-minded than people realized. She understood early on that being typecast could still be profitable. And for a while, it was. My Friend Irma launched a successful franchise and helped introduce a young Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis to the world. However, Wilson leaned into the dumb blonde image so completely that the line between character and identity blurred. In public appearances, she often stayed in character, which delighted fans but made industry insiders hesitant to offer her more complex roles. Even her interviews were sprinkled with scripted confusion, reinforcing the idea that she wasn't acting at all. Though she expressed interest in stretching herself creatively, the offers never came, and she wasn't aggressive enough in pursuing them. Directors stopped seeing her as capable of handling anything outside the mold. Marie Wilson's story is a cautionary tale about branding too well. Her commitment to one character made her unforgettable, but it also made her unchangeable. In the end, she played the role so convincingly that even Hollywood forgot she was only pretending. Shmp Howard, behind the Stooges slapstick. He was the quieter stooge, less iconic than Curly, not as sharp-tongued as Moe, but still part of one of comedy's most enduring teams. Shmp Howard had the timing and physicality to land a laugh, yet struggled to define himself outside the shadow of his brothers. Originally one of the founding Stooges, Shmp stepped away early in their career, only to return years later when Curly's health forced a replacement. By then, Moe and Larry had already become synonymous with the act. Though Shmp gamely filled the role, he never quite won the audience's affection in the same way. His style was looser, his reactions less exaggerated, and many fans considered him the odd stooge out. Behind the scenes, Shmp didn't push for standout opportunities. He was content playing supporting roles and rarely challenged scripts, direction, or his public image. Colleagues recalled him as affable but uninspired, a dependable performer who didn't chase the spotlight. He also lacked the drive to separate himself from the group brand. While other comedians explored solo acts or reinvented their personas, Shmp stayed comfortably in the background. His work outside the Stooges was modest and largely forgettable. While Shmp Howard contributed to comedy history, he remained a character actor in both perception and ambition. His place in the trio was steady but subdued, a performer whose loyalty and timing were solid, even if his legacy never reached the same comedic heights. Lana Turner, sweater girl, smart moves, sometimes. She was discovered sipping a soda at a Hollywood drugstore and became an overnight sensation. Lana Turner's rise was pure studio myth-making, beauty, glamour, and just enough mystery to drive headlines. But beneath the surface, her career was filled with sharp instincts, and just as many missteps. Turner became one of MGM's top stars, known for roles in films like The Postman Always Rings Twice and Peyton Place. She had a magnetic screen presence and often outmaneuvered her handlers, demanding more say in scripts and wardrobe, and keeping her name at the top of the marquee. Yet, despite flashes of business savvy, Turner clung to the same roles and persona, the glamorous, sultry beauty with a tragic streak. When the studio system began to fade and audiences shifted toward grittier films, she didn't pivot fast enough. While contemporaries like Joan Crawford redefined themselves, Turner remained locked in the image that made her famous. She also avoided branching out behind the camera. While others diversified or formed production companies, she stayed reliant on studio decisions. Turner's personal life, often splashed across tabloids, further distracted from what could have been a more enduring evolution. Lana Turner's brilliance came in bursts, but she never fully stepped outside the myth she helped create. Her story isn't one of failure, but of a star who didn't always adjust when Hollywood's spotlight moved. Rita Hworth, crafted goddess, limited strategy. She was a symbol of wartime glamour, sultry, poised, and mesmerizing on the silver screen. Rita Hworth didn't just star in films, she became a fantasy. But while her public image was masterfully shaped, her behind-the-scenes strategy lacked the same finesse. Her transformation from Margarita Cancino into the iconic redhead was one of Hollywood's most dramatic reinventions. Gilda sealed her status as a screen siren, and she seemed to float effortlessly through the studio system. Yet the persona that made her famous often held her back. Hworth accepted roles that emphasized her beauty, sometimes at the expense of depth. Studios capitalized on her looks, but rarely pushed her toward challenging scripts. Even when offered projects that could have reshaped her image, she turned them down, afraid they didn't fit her type. Unlike peers who formed production companies or fought for better roles, Hworth largely trusted studios to guide her career. That passivity led to missed opportunities and fading relevance as new stars emerged. Her personal life, often marked by high-profile relationships, added to the sense that others were steering the ship. Though she remained beloved, her image was more curated than controlled. Rita Hworth remains an icon, but not for reinvention or vision. Her legend was carefully crafted, but rarely driven by her own hand. Ava Gardner, country girl lost in control. She had a voice like honey and a face the camera adored. Ava Gardner exuded natural charisma, a Southern beauty who became one of Hollywood's most glamorous stars. But behind the elegance was a woman often unsure how to shape her own career, even as others tried to shape it for her. Gardner's breakthrough in The Killers launched her into leading lady status, and her mix of vulnerability and sensuality made her a global icon. She worked with top directors, starred opposite legends, and was frequently named among the most beautiful women in the world. But fame didn't always translate into wise decisions. Though Gardner was intelligent and intuitive, she rarely took control of her professional trajectory. She avoided media training and resisted studio coaching, preferring to let her natural charm do the work. That worked for a while, but as Hollywood evolved and image management became crucial, her hands-off approach began to backfire. She also leaned heavily on the idea that she was just a simple girl from North Carolina, a story that appealed to fans but sometimes became a crutch. Industry insiders noted that she passed on more strategic opportunities, production roles, publicity plans, or long-term projects that could have extended her influence. Her personal life, filled with tumultuous romances and tabloid stories, often overshadowed her career choices. Though she left a memorable legacy on screen, it's clear that Gardner could have done more to shape her future, if only she'd seen herself with the same confidence others saw in her. Marilyn Monroe, icon of strategic stupidity. She was the ultimate blonde bombshell, breathy voice, dazzling smile, and a screen presence that defined an era. But Marilyn Monroe wasn't nearly as naive as Hollywood wanted the world to believe. In fact, she built an empire by leaning into the very image that underestimated her. Behind the scenes, Monroe was sharp and calculated. With an IQ reportedly higher than Albert Einstein's, she studied acting with Lee Strasberg, took control of her image, and challenged the studio system in ways few actresses dared. She even co-founded her own production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions, to gain more control over her roles and escape typecasting. But the dumb blonde label stuck, partly because she played it so well. Her performances in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and The 7-Year Itch became iconic, yet also reinforced a persona that many began to mistake for the real her. Ironically, the act was so convincing that even colleagues doubted her intelligence or drive. Monroe also struggled with being taken seriously. Directors questioned her focus, co-stars mocked her preparation, and studio executives often chose to believe the image rather than the woman. That disconnect frustrated her, but she rarely broke character in public, perhaps believing the illusion was still her best bet for success. Her life was marked by personal challenges and intense public scrutiny, which added to the idea that she was fragile, but beneath the surface was someone who understood the game and played it better than most. She didn't just survive Hollywood's expectations, she turned them into her greatest asset. Fame doesn't always mean foresight. As we've seen, many of Golden Age Hollywood's brightest stars were adored, not for their strategy or skill, but for how well they fit a type, followed orders, or simply coasted on charisma. Some leaned into personas they couldn't shake. Others had brilliance that got tangled in bad choices, fear of change, or misplaced trust. And a few, despite all the spotlight, never truly grasped how fleeting fame could be. But that's what makes these stories so fascinating. Behind every perfect smile or iconic scene was a real person, sometimes brilliant, sometimes baffling, navigating a system that rewarded beauty more than planning. In the end, it's a reminder that even legends can miss the mark, and that being unforgettable doesn't always mean being wise. If you enjoyed this look behind the curtain, be sure to like and subscribe for more. And tell us, which star on this list surprised you the most?